The transmission came from a small yellow star in the outer spiral arm. Ambassador Velther listened to it 3 times before he truly understood what he was hearing. The mathematical equations were perfect. The physics were advanced beyond what most species achieved in their first 1,000 years of space travel. And the message itself was simple. We are humanity. We wish to meet you. Velther was a Karathi, and his people had guided first contact protocols for 5,000 years. His species could sense emotions across vast distances, feel the intentions behind words, understand the heart beneath the surface. It made them perfect diplomats. In all his centuries of service, he had welcomed 63 species into the Galactic Council. Each time had been a moment of joy that he prepared for the journey to Earth with his usual excitement. The briefing materials fascinated him. Humans had only discovered faster-than-light physics 2 years ago. Most species took decades to progress from theory to practical application. Humans had done it in 23 months. Their mathematics were elegant, their engineering efficient. They seemed remarkably intelligent. The human delegation met them at the designated coordinates, a space station orbiting their moon. The humans had built it in 6 months specifically for this meeting. Velther was impressed. His own people had taken years to construct their first orbital facility. The lead human diplomat was a woman named Ambassador Collins. She smiled warmly and extended her hand in the human greeting gesture. Velther had studied it carefully. He returned the gesture, careful to match the appropriate pressure. Collins led them through the station, pointing out various features. Everything was clean, organized, efficient. "We're honored to meet you," Collins said. Her voice was pleasant, her manner professional. "We've prepared extensive documentation about our civilization. Population statistics, resource inventories, technological capabilities, territorial claims, and proposed trade frameworks. We believe in transparency." Velther settled into the negotiation chamber. The humans had researched Karathi anatomy and provided perfectly sized furniture. They had adjusted the lighting to match his species' preference. They had even included a small fountain, as Karathi found the sound of water soothing. The attention to detail was remarkable. The negotiations began. Collins presented humanity's position with crystal clarity. They wanted access to galactic trade routes. They wanted to establish embassies on key worlds. They wanted to purchase certain technologies that would accelerate their development. In exchange, they offered raw materials, mathematical research, and strategic consultation services. It all seemed reasonable. But Velther couldn't shake a growing unease. He extended his empathic senses toward Collins, something he did instinctively in every conversation. Usually, he felt warmth, curiosity, nervousness, excitement, the emotional texture of meeting new minds. From Collins, he felt calculations, not emotions, but processes. He sensed her running through probability trees, weighing options, adjusting strategies based on his responses. There was no malice, no deception. But there was no warmth either. She was solving a puzzle, not building a relationship. He tested her. He made an unreasonable demand, asking for access to human military installations as a condition of trade. He wanted to see anger, indignation, fear. Instead, Collins paused for exactly 2 seconds. He felt her mind spinning through scenarios, calculating risks and benefits. Then she smiled again. "That wouldn't be acceptable," she said calmly. "However, we can offer limited inspection privileges with appropriate safeguards. Would you like to see our counter-proposal?" Velther's unease deepened. He tried a different approach. He told her a story about his own first contact experience centuries ago, meeting a species of crystalline beings who communicated through light. He described the beauty of their language, the wonder of connection. He made it personal, emotional. Collins listened attentively. She asked relevant questions. She made appropriate sympathetic sounds. But underneath, Velther felt her cataloging information, filing it away for future use. She wasn't connecting with his story emotionally. She was learning how to better manipulate emotional beings. The realization struck him like cold water. She wasn't being cruel. She wasn't pretending. She simply didn't have the capacity to care about his experience except as useful data. To her, he was a foreign system to understand and optimize interactions with, not a person to know. He probed deeper, reaching further with his empathic sense. He touched the minds of other humans in the station. Scientists, engineers, security personnel. In each one, he found the same thing. Brilliant minds running constant calculations. They saw the universe as a series of problems to solve, systems to optimize, variables to control. They cooperated with each other because game theory proved cooperation was beneficial. They followed ethics because societies with ethical rules functioned better than those without, but there was no instinctive compassion, no automatic empathy for suffering that wasn't their own. They could choose to be kind, but it was always a choice, never an impulse. The meeting continued for 6 more hours. Collins and her team were perfect negotiators. They anticipated every objection, prepared counter-arguments for every concern, and offered compromises that seemed fair on the surface. By the end, Velther had agreed to a preliminary trade agreement. The humans would get most of what they wanted. He returned to his ship feeling shaken. His staff asked how it had gone. He told them it went well. The humans were intelligent, reasonable, and willing to cooperate. All true statements. But that night, alone in his quarters, he began writing his report to the Galactic Council. His hands trembled slightly as he composed the words. He tried several versions, each time struggling to capture what disturbed him so deeply. Finally, he wrote simply, "Humanity possesses extraordinary intelligence and technological capability. They understand cooperation, negotiation, and mutual benefit. They can predict our responses with uncanny accuracy. They will follow the rules we establish because they recognize the value of stable systems. But I must note something unprecedented in my 5,000 years of service. They think like machines that learn to smile. They have intelligence without instinct, logic without love. I recommend proceeding with extreme caution." He sent the report and sat in the darkness, listening to his fountain. Tomorrow, he would return to Earth for the second round of negotiations. The humans would be friendly, accommodating, and perfectly reasonable. And that, somehow, was what terrified him most. He couldn't stop wondering what would happen when humanity's calculations determined that cooperation was no longer optimal. Would they choose kindness anyway? Or would they simply update their strategy and move forward without hesitation, without guilt, without a moment of doubt? The answer, he feared, was already obvious. 6 months passed faster than Velther expected. Humanity integrated into galactic society with remarkable speed. They learned every language, studied every culture, and established trade relationships with 47 different worlds. The Council praised them as model new members. Then the complaints started arriving. The first came from the Metherian Trading Consortium. Human corporations had entered their markets and systematically dismantled their largest companies within 3 months. The Metherians weren't angry about competition. They were disturbed by the methods. The humans had studied Metherian psychology, identified cognitive biases, and exploited them with surgical precision. Every advertisement targeted subconscious triggers. Every negotiation pressed emotional vulnerabilities. Every contract contained clauses the Metherians hadn't noticed until it was too late. They didn't break any laws, the Metherian representative told the Council. That's what frightens us. They understood our minds better than we understand ourselves. They played us like instruments. More complaints followed. The Zynthian planetary government reported that human consultants had optimized their bureaucracy, eliminating inefficiencies. On paper, it looked wonderful. In practice, the humans had removed traditional ceremonies that held cultural significance, eliminated positions held by elders deserving honor, and restructured everything for pure efficiency. When the Zintians protested, the humans seemed genuinely confused. "Your government processes applications 60% faster now," the human consultant had said. "Your citizens spend less time waiting. Everyone benefits. Why does it matter that we removed obsolete ceremonial steps?" The Zintians tried to explain about tradition, respect, cultural identity. The human had listened politely and made notes. Then she asked if they wanted to revert to the old system and accept the efficiency losses. The way she phrased it made them sound foolish for caring about anything except results. Velther read every complaint with growing dread. He recognized the pattern. Humans weren't being malicious. They were being logical. They saw systems that could be improved and improved them. Regardless of emotional or cultural consequences, they couldn't instinctively feel. Then came the crisis on Praxis 4. Praxis 4 was an agricultural world, simple and peaceful. They had suffered 3 years of blight that destroyed their crops. Famine was spreading. They sent desperate requests to the Council for aid. Traditional relief efforts were underway, but they would take years to fully restore the planet's agriculture. A human agricultural consortium called Geneticorp offered a solution. They had developed genetically modified crops specifically designed for Praxis IV soil and climate. The new plants would be resistant to the blight, grow faster, and yield 10 times the harvest. They could end the famine within 1 growing season. The Praxians were grateful beyond measure. They signed the contract immediately. Geneticorp delivered the seeds, provided technical support, and the crops grew exactly as promised. Within 4 months, Praxis 4 was producing more food than before the blight. Children stopped starving. The famine ended. Then the Praxians read the fine print of the contract more carefully. Geneticorp owned the patent on the genetic sequences. The crops were modified to be sterile after 1 generation, requiring new seeds each year. The contract gave Geneticorp exclusive rights to supply seeds to Praxis 4 for the next 99 years. The price would be fair market value, determined by Geneticorp based on supply and demand. The Praxians suddenly realized they had traded one crisis for another. They no longer controlled their own food supply. They were dependent on a human corporation that could set whatever prices it wanted. If they refused to pay, their people would starve. They brought their case to the council, their representative weeping with shame and rage. Velther listened with his heart breaking. He had tried to warn them. They hadn't understood until too late. The council summoned the Geneticorp representative, a man named Marcus Webb. He arrived promptly, carrying detailed presentations. He seemed happy to explain. "The Praxians were starving," Webb said calmly. "We invested enormous resources developing a solution specific to their needs. Our scientists worked around the clock. We took significant financial risk. The contract ensures we can recover our investment and continue funding research that helps other worlds. This is standard business practice." "You exploited their desperation," Velther said, unable to contain his anger. "They had no choice but to accept your terms." Webb looked puzzled. They had choices. They could have waited for traditional aid. They could have attempted to develop their own solution. They chose our offer because it was the best available option. We provided exactly what we promised. How is that exploitation? You knew they were desperate. You knew they couldn't negotiate fairly from that position. Their desperation was not our creation, Webb replied. It increased their willingness to accept our terms, yes. That's basic economics. Value is determined by supply and demand. We had the supply they desperately demanded. I'm not seeing the ethical problem. The council chamber erupted in arguments. Various species tried to explain concepts like compassionate pricing, fair dealing, and taking advantage of the vulnerable. Webb listened to everything, took notes, and asked clarifying questions. But Velther could feel his mind processing it all as abstract data, not moral truth. Finally, Elder Moroses of the Venturi species raised his hand for silence. The Venturi were philosophers, respected throughout the galaxy for their wisdom. Everyone quieted to hear him speak. "I have a question for you, Marcus Webb," Moroses said gently. "When you negotiated this contract, knowing the Praxians were starving, did you feel any hesitation? Any discomfort at profiting from their suffering?" Webb considered the question seriously. "No," he said after a moment. "I felt satisfaction at finding an efficient solution to a complex problem. The Praxians needed help. We could provide it. We structured an agreement that ensured mutual benefit. I'm proud of that work. You feel no guilt?" Moroses pressed. "Why would I feel guilt? We saved millions of lives. We followed all legal and contractual requirements. We were transparent about the terms." Webb paused, then added, "Should I feel guilt? Is that the expected emotional response? I can adjust my approach in future negotiations if that would be more culturally appropriate." The chamber fell silent. Webb sat there, genuinely trying to understand what response they wanted from him. He would simulate whatever emotion they required if it helped him optimize future interactions. But he didn't feel it. He couldn't feel it. Velther watched various council members realize what he had known for months. Humans understood ethics intellectually. They could learn rules and follow them. But they didn't have the instinctive empathy that made other species care about alien suffering. To Webb, the Praxians were variables in an equation. He had solved the equation efficiently. The fact that his solution bound an entire species in economic chains for a century didn't register as a moral concern. The council debated for hours after Webb left. Some wanted to void the contract. Others argued they had no legal grounds. A few species quietly sent representatives to meet with human corporations, hoping to benefit from human ruthlessness before becoming targets. Velther returned to his quarters, exhausted. He found a message waiting from Ambassador Collins. It was cheerful and friendly. Humanity was hosting a cultural festival next month. Would he like to attend? They would be honored by his presence. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he began drafting another report to the council. This one would be much longer and far more urgent than the first. Outside his window, human ships moved through the station, efficient and purposeful. Each one following optimal routes, making calculated decisions, pursuing logical goals. There was no malice in their movements. But there was no mercy either. Just mathematics, eternally calculating the most efficient path forward. The council authorized the empathy protocol 3 weeks after the Praxis 4 incident. It was an unprecedented program designed to teach humans emotional consideration for other species. They recruited human volunteers, offered generous compensation, and promised this would help humanity build better relationships. Across the galaxy, 200 humans volunteered in the first week. Velther wasn't surprised. Humans always optimized their opportunities. Participating in the program would give them advantages in future negotiations, better understanding of alien psychology, and enhanced career prospects. They had calculated the benefits and signed up. The program began with neural mapping. Scientists from 6 different species studied human brain structure, trying to understand why they lacked instinctive empathy for aliens. They found the humans had strong empathic responses to other humans, especially family members. They even felt empathy for Earth animals, particularly ones with certain features that triggered nurturing instincts. But when shown images of suffering aliens, the human brain response was minimal. The same regions activated as when they watched machines malfunction. Problem recognition, not emotional distress. Dr. Sarah Chun, one of the human volunteers, found this fascinating. She was a neuroscientist herself and eagerly participated in every test. When the results came back, she asked to present her analysis to the council. Valther wasn't sure he wanted to hear it, but he agreed. Chun stood before the council with the confidence of someone presenting obvious facts. The issue is evolutionary, she explained. We developed empathy for our own species because it helped our ancestors survive. Groups that cared for each other outcompeted groups that didn't. We extended this to Earth animals because their features resembled human babies. Big eyes, certain proportions. Our brains categorized them as protect this. She gestured at the assembled aliens. There was a crystalline being, a tentacled species that floated in a tank, and several others with forms unlike anything on Earth. You don't trigger those instincts. Chun continued matter-of-factly. Your forms are too different. Our brains categorize you as other or unknown. We can choose to treat you ethically through conscious reasoning. We can learn your cultural values and respect them through deliberate effort. But it doesn't happen automatically. Every single time, it requires conscious choice. Elder Moroses asked the question everyone was thinking. So you feel nothing when we suffer? Chun considered carefully. I feel intellectual concern. I recognize suffering is bad and want to solve it. But emotional distress? She shook her head. No more than I'd feel watching a computer crash. Both register as problems requiring solutions. The emotional weight is the same. The chamber fell into shocked silence. Chun seemed oblivious to the horror her words caused. She was simply sharing data. The program continued. They tried cultural exchange, hoping exposure would build emotional bonds. They tried neural treatments to enhance mirror neurons. They tried everything they could think of. Some humans showed slight improvement. Most remained fundamentally unchanged. They learned to simulate appropriate emotional responses. But the underlying feeling wasn't there. Then came the protest on station. Meridian. A group of Xinthian workers had gathered to protest working conditions at a human-run manufacturing facility. The protest was peaceful but passionate. The workers had occupied the facility's main entrance, singing traditional songs and displaying cultural symbols. The location was sacred in their culture, a place where their ancestors had first arrived at the station generations ago. Human security forces received orders to clear the protest. The facility needed to maintain production schedules. The security team assessed the situation, calculated the minimal force required, and implemented their plan with perfect efficiency. They used sonic weapons calibrated to Xinthian hearing sensitivity. The protesters collapsed within seconds, unconscious but unharmed physically. The security team removed them, cleared the area, and production resumed within 12 minutes. By every objective measure, the operation was flawless. No permanent injuries. No property damage. Minimal disruption. The Xinthians were traumatized. The humans had desecrated a sacred site without hesitation. They had calculated the exact amount of pain to inflict for compliance. They had treated living beings like obstacles to remove. When the protesters woke, many were weeping. Some refused to eat for days. The human security chief filed a report stating the operation was successful. When questioned about the cultural significance of the site, she acknowledged it in her report but noted it wasn't relevant to the primary objective of clearing the protesters safely and efficiently. Valther visited the Xinthian protesters in the medical center. They were physically fine but emotionally shattered. One elder looked at him with hollow eyes. They didn't hate us, the elder said quietly. That would have been easier to understand. They just didn't care. We were things in their way. problems to solve. That night, someone leaked classified footage from a human military planning session. It had been recorded months earlier, just routine strategic analysis. The footage showed human officers discussing theoretical scenarios for galactic conquest. The discussion was calm, academic. They mapped out economic integration strategies, identified key choke points in trade routes, calculated military force requirements for various resistance scenarios. They debated whether biological weapons would be more efficient than conventional warfare, purely as an intellectual exercise. The math was elegant. The planning was thorough. They weren't plotting actual conquest. They were just running simulations, the way a chess computer analyzes possible moves. But watching humans discuss the systematic subjugation of the galaxy with the same emotional tone someone might use to discuss weather patterns was profoundly disturbing. The galaxy panicked. 3 factions emerged almost immediately. The isolationists, led by Velther, wanted humanity quarantined to their own space. Let them develop there, but limit their contact with the rest of the galaxy. They were simply too dangerous to integrate. The integrationists argued humans could be reformed. They pointed to individual humans who had formed genuine friendships with aliens, who had chosen ethics over efficiency repeatedly. These humans existed. They were rare, but they proved change was possible. The realists took a different approach. They acknowledged humans couldn't be fundamentally changed, but suggested finding a way to coexist anyway. Some species privately admitted they valued what humans could offer. There were problems that required ruthless efficiency, calculations without sentiment, solutions that no empathic species could implement without emotional cost. The debate raged for weeks. Velther attended every session, growing more exhausted each day. He watched the council fracture along philosophical and practical lines. Some species were terrified. Others were intrigued. A few were already negotiating quiet partnerships with human corporations and governments. One night, Velther received a message from Ambassador Collins. It was brief and to the point. We understand the concerns. We're willing to discuss frameworks for coexistence. We can accept restrictions if they're logical. We just want clarity on the rules. He stared at the message. Even now, they were optimizing. They had analyzed the political situation, calculated that cooperation was still beneficial, and adjusted their strategy accordingly. There was no outrage at being feared, no hurt at being rejected. Just pragmatic adaptation to changing circumstances. Velther began drafting yet another report. But this time, he wasn't sure what to recommend. Humanity was dangerous, but isolating them might make them more dangerous. They were useful, but using them felt like inviting a predator into your home and hoping it followed the rules. The answer, if there was one, would have to come from the full council. And judging by the endless debates, that answer was still very far away. The Vryn plague arrived like a nightmare. It started on the Vryn homeworld and spread with terrifying speed. The Vryn were an aquatic species, gentle and artistic. Their cities were underwater marvels of bioluminescent beauty. Within 3 weeks, the plague had infected 40% of their population. Traditional medicine failed. The Galactic Health Council sent their best researchers. They tried every known treatment, every experimental therapy. Nothing worked. The plague mutated faster than they could study it. Projections showed the Vryn species would be extinct within 2 years. The Vryn Council of Elders faced an impossible choice. They could continue with conventional research and watch their species die slowly. Or they could ask humanity for help, knowing what that might mean. They chose survival. Their request came to the Galactic Council with heartbreaking simplicity. We are dying. We need humanity's help, whatever the cost. The council debated for 6 hours. Velther argued against it, though his heart broke doing so. He knew what would happen. Others argued that letting an entire species die when help was available would be its own kind of monstrosity. In the end, they approved the request. Dr. Sarah Chun arrived on the Vrin homeworld with a team of human researchers. They brought equipment, scanning technology, and computational power that exceeded anything the Vrin had seen. Chun assessed the situation with her characteristic efficiency. "We'll need complete access to your medical databases, population genetics, and current infection data," she told the Vrin elders. "We'll also need test subjects. Several thousand infected individuals across different infection stages." The Vrin hesitated. Test subjects meant using their dying people as experiments. Chun noticed their discomfort and added, "These individuals will likely die anyway. We can learn from their deaths and potentially save millions. It's the logical choice." The Vrin agreed because they had no other option. What followed over the next 3 weeks horrified the galaxy. Human researchers worked with mechanical precision. They didn't waste time on comfort or dignity. They selected test subjects based purely on infection progression and genetic diversity. They isolated them in sterile facilities, monitored their deterioration, and tested hundreds of treatment combinations simultaneously. When subjects died, the humans immediately harvested tissue samples and moved to the next test. They didn't hold ceremonies. They didn't offer condolences. They processed data and adjusted variables. The Vrin observers wept. The human researchers took notes on Vrin emotional responses, possibly useful data for future reference. Chun implemented quarantine protocols that were mathematically optimal but culturally devastating. She split families without hesitation if one member was infected. She sealed off entire city sections when infection rates exceeded acceptable thresholds. When Vrin begged to say goodbye to dying relatives, she denied requests that would increase exposure risk. "Emotional closure is not a medical priority," she explained to a grieving Vrin mother. "Contact with your daughter would increase infection probability by 17%. That's unacceptable." The mother's anguished cries were recorded as data points about Vrin emotional response to familial separation. But the humans found a solution. 3 weeks after arriving, Chun announced they had developed a treatment. It was a combination of genetic therapy, targeted antibiotics, and immune system modification. The cure rate in final testing was 94%. The Vrin were saved. Mass production began immediately. Human efficiency meant that within 2 months, every infected Vrin received treatment. The plague was contained, then eliminated. 8 million Vrin had died, but the remaining 800 million would live. The Vrin Council of Elders invited Chen to a ceremony honoring the human researchers. They gathered in their most sacred temple, a cathedral of living coral that had stood for 10,000 years. The elders prepared speeches of gratitude. They had composed songs of thanks in the traditional way. Chun arrived on schedule. She listened politely to the speeches. When asked to respond, she gave a brief summary of the research methods and expressed satisfaction at the successful outcome. She didn't mention the emotional journey, the sacrifice, or the cultural sensitivity. She had solved a problem efficiently. Mission accomplished. After the ceremony, the eldest Vrin approached her privately. His name was Collector of Sorrows, and he had lived for 3 centuries. He had seen much in his long life, but he had never encountered beings like humans. "You saved us," he said quietly. "My entire species owes you a debt we can never repay. But I must tell you something, and I hope you will not be offended." Chun nodded, waiting for him to continue. "You made us feel like livestock being managed, not people being rescued. You chose the fastest solution over the kindest one at every turn. You saved our bodies but wounded our spirits. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Chun considered this for a moment. Then she pulled out her datapad and made notes. "That's valuable feedback," she said. In future medical crisis responses, we should probably simulate compassionate communication, even when it doesn't directly affect treatment outcomes. The computational overhead would be minimal, and it would significantly improve patients' psychological response. She paused, reviewing her notes. Would verbal expressions of sympathy at regular intervals be sufficient? Or do you recommend more substantial emotional engagement protocols? Collector of Sorrows stared at her. She was trying to optimize compassion like it was a software feature. She would add, "seem caring" to her checklist because the data suggested it improved outcomes. But she still didn't actually care. "Never mind," he said softly. "Thank you for saving us." The incident on the Vryn homeworld became the catalyst for the final decision. The Galactic Council convened for what everyone knew would be the conclusive session. Representatives from 500 species gathered. The debate lasted 3 days. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied no one but seemed necessary to everyone. They called it the Soul Accords. Humanity would be recognized as a full member of galactic civilization. They would have access to trade, technology exchange, and diplomatic relations. But there would be restrictions. Humans could not hold positions in healthcare, education, or social services where empathy was essential. They could not govern non-human populations. They would be monitored by oversight committees. In exchange, humanity would be given tasks where their unique perspective was valuable. Resource optimization, strategic planning, system analysis, crisis response where efficiency mattered more than emotion. They would be specialists, valued but controlled. The humans accepted immediately. The restrictions made logical sense to them. They had no desire to do work they weren't suited for. The arrangement was efficient. Velther voted for the Accords, though it felt like defeat. He had spent months trying to find a better solution and failed. This was simply the least bad option available. A year after the Soul Accords were signed, Velther visited a cultural exchange center on the station. It was part of the integration program, a place where human and alien children could interact. He watched a human girl, perhaps 8 years old, playing with a young Karathi child. The human girl shared her toys. She laughed at the Karathi's jokes. She helped when the alien child struggled to reach something. She was kind, gentle, considerate. A perfect example of cross-species friendship. But Velther extended his empathic senses and felt the truth. The girl was following learned rules. Be nice, share, help others. She did these things because her parents had taught her they were right. Because her teachers had praised her for kindness. Because society rewarded prosocial behavior. She would grow up making the choice to be kind every single day. Every interaction with an alien would require conscious effort. She would never have the automatic, instinctive compassion that other species felt. For her entire life, empathy would be work, not nature. Velther wondered which was more admirable, actually. A species that was kind because they couldn't help it, or a species that chose kindness despite feeling nothing. He didn't have an answer. He left the center and walked through the station. Everywhere he looked, he saw the new reality. Humans working alongside aliens, following the rules, cooperating effectively. It was functional. It was stable. It was the best they could manage. But at night, in his quiet moments, Velther still felt the chill of that first meeting with Ambassador Collins. He remembered touching her mind and finding calculations where emotions should be. He had hoped time would make that feeling fade, but it hadn't. Humanity had proven something the galaxy never wanted to know. Intelligence and compassion were not inevitably linked. You could have brilliant minds that felt nothing, beings that could solve any problem, but couldn't understand why some solutions felt wrong. And now they all had to live with that knowledge. The humans had a saying Velther had learned, "It is what it is." They used it when facing uncomfortable truths that couldn't be changed. He finally understood what it meant. Humanity was what it was, and the galaxy would simply have to adapt.